What's happening, guys? This is James Blum with MMOHuts.com, and with all the crazy business model changes and what seems to be some reverts to the past, there are many pay-to-play games out there that have had huge success when they transform themselves into free-to-play titles. Who knows if it's likely if some of the big titles we would like to see go free-to-play actually do, but, you know, then again, some just might. So with that in mind, I've put together a list of the best games that have once been pay-to-play and chose to make that switch to free-to-play, starting with Dungeons & Dragons Online. Now, it was a pretty new thing for North American MMO players to see a game just all of a sudden go free-to-play like Dungeons & Dragons Online did. Turbine announced the game would have a free-to-play option on June 9th, 2009, giving players access to everything in the game with no level cap restrictions. But at the same time, and even to this day, players could choose to continue to pay a monthly subscription fee to remain a VIP member that grants them extra benefits like exclusive events, DLC adventure packs, and more available races to play as. But because it was a new hybrid business model, it picked up a good deal of popularity, signifying it was a smart move on their part. So as soon as Turbine saw the success that DDO had, it was a done deal. They didn't really have any reason not to do the same thing with the Lord of the Rings Online. And with Lord of the Rings Online episodic content literally pre-written out for them by J.R.R. Tolkien, it was not only a more profitable business model to adapt, but a model that would also take little to no effort to implement. It was pretty much already set up for it, and it seems to be working out nicely from an overall perspective. I mean, they're setting up to launch their latest expansion, Helm's Deep, on November 18th. Next up, we've got Ragnarok Online, and they started adding free-to-play servers just after private servers started becoming more and more popular. In fact, it was the private servers that had Gravity Interactive start adding free-to-play servers, most with notably slower experience game and limited access to a few special features, but it transitioned for the same reason Rose Online did. The private servers were just taking away from their pay-to-play business model, and now handling completely free-to-play for several years now, we can thank them for making that fun MMORPG that much more accessible to everyone. And next up, we've got Lineage II. With the same pressures coming from private servers as Ragnarok Online over the long time it's been around, it's surprising that Lineage II didn't drop its $15 a month subscription sooner than it did, especially since it was already free-to-play in other parts of the world. So during this time, WoW continued to soak up any and all MMO gamers looking for a subscription title. But Lineage II also felt the crunch from the growing free-to-play options, built on newer engines and offering nicer polish. Not to mention, NCSoft had its own buy-to-play title coming around the corner, which was Guild Wars 2. It was definitely clear that a change was needed in order to keep the game profitable in the West, and that's probably why Lineage 2 made plans to go free-to-play in preparation for the launch of Star Wars: The Old Republic. And so as a result of Lineage 2 having a successful free-to-play model that doesn't restrict player access to content, NCSoft decided to make Aion free-to-play the same way. So, feeling that the player population is one of the primary factors in the game's fun, as of April 2012, North American players in Aion gained access to every piece of content in the game completely free, along with the use of the cash shop to keep the game profitable. Next up on the list is Age of Conan, and it didn't have the smoothest launch back in 2008. The game had more bugs in it than it did actual content, and like a lot of the games on the list, it took about 2 years for it to have a free-to-play option. But when they finally transitioned, they changed the name from Age of Conan Hyborian Adventures to Age of Conan Unchained. I guess the name sort of plays on the fact that players are no longer bound to a subscription model, or at least that's what some people think. Free-to-play players had limited access to a lot of the game's features, but were made available again in the game's cash shop. Thankfully, over time, the game has redeemed itself by polishing out a majority of its problems. Next up, we have Star Trek Online. When a game flops hard at launch like Star Trek Online, and other titles are finding new life in the free-to-play model, it makes a lot of sense to take one more stab at saving all the time and effort designing the game with a new model. And honestly, Star Trek Online never really had a choice in the matter. Its success was riding heavily on the timing of Atari selling Cryptic Studios off, and Perfect World Entertainment, one of the first free-to-play juggernauts to arrive in the MMOsphere, buying the developers up directly after. But it was really just a luck shot, and after that, it became one of the more popular free-to-play games on Steam, along with his next title, DC Universe Online. With its epic announced trailer that everybody wishes was an actual movie, including me, the game launched early in 2011 and went free-to-play later that year, but it split into Legendary, Premium, and Free memberships, which was actually pretty cool for console players who had not originally bought the game, of course, but for the most part, the only content free players can't get without paying is the game's 8 DLC packs. With its success as a free-to-play MMO, it was one of the first titles announced for the PlayStation 4. So, since we're on SOE games, we've got to mention the big ones, EverQuest and EverQuest II. The original EverQuest started as a concept in SOE's president's John Smedley's head back in 1996, and the game released in March of '99. and it wasn't until March of 2012 that the game went completely free to play with no option to buy a subscription. The craziest part of that is that the game didn't even feel forced to go free to play. There are plenty of loyal fans that would be glad to pay as much today as they did when it launched. It was more of a move by the entire company to go free to play, and from their perspective, it just invited more curious players in. EverQuest II, on the other hand, came out nearly 6 years later, offering upgraded graphics and customization over EverQuest, and went free to play around the same time. But it wasn't until fairly recently that all the free to play restrictions were lifted for players. So learning useful business model information over many years is allowing SOE to have their latest title, EverQuest Next, launch as a free to play game with no limitations, restrictions, or subscription options. EverQuest Next is going to be a badass game built off of plenty of years of experience and trial and error. And then you have games that go free to play for the sake of going free to play, like with Team Fortress 2. Well, kind of. I mean, I would say that in retrospect, ongoing sales of the game were going to fall anyway, but going free to play with a fan base as large as Team Fortress 2 would create one fierce opponent for other games to contend with, so, you know, why not? Once they finally made the decision to do so, it was all about the hats and other cash shop items that were already in place prior to the transition, but played a much bigger part after the shift. It worked well enough that the game from there was as much as an item collecting game as it was a team shooter. Then Valve decided to make it their flagship free Steam title, and they were good to go. So now we go back to one we mentioned earlier, Star Wars: The Old Republic. I like to say BioWare hesitated on the free-to-play idea with this one. It's like they wanted to try it because some of the cool kids were doing it, but they really didn't take it seriously. The game went free-to-play, but not really. The only thing you got free was the story content. You didn't get to chat, get mail, have an inventory, or even have character creation options. They were basically selling parts of their user interface if you want to look at it that way. But fortunately, over time, enough players spoke loud enough for this to change, and now 75% of these restrictions are lifted for its free-to-play audience, and they've made it pretty easy to get to preferred status, granting you a lot more with just one single purchase. And finally, we have 2 remaining games on the list that I can safely say sat really well with players as they went free-to-play, and the first one is Tera. For some reason, Tera started out with players wanting it to go free-to-play, probably because it felt like it would be the coolest MMORPG to ever go free-to-play. A lot of people say that it was because the game was too expensive to pay for and it wasn't really worth the price, and therefore the game was dead. Honestly, that wasn't the case. The developers noted that it was the most common complaint from players that the game had a subscription model, but it didn't have a large effect on the population due to the fact that it was sub-based. But then again, it looked that way whenever they gained tons of players after the switch. Tera Rising is doing pretty good as a free-to-play MMORPG. Hopefully this will reflect confidence on upcoming developers looking to make their games free-to-play from the get-go. And most recently we have Rift. Going free-to-play in a similar sense that Tera did, the developers felt this newfound pressure that subscription models are becoming a thing of the past, and that there are other ways to make MMORPGs profitable and still have them remain everything they once were, or even more profitable for that matter. And besides, Rift was looking into the free-to-play model for a while and did see success from it with Rift Lite. Either way, the game is flourishing now, and it's easy to say that that was a good idea on their part. And the fact of the matter is that there are plenty of games that have gone from a pay-to-play model to a free-to-play model and have seen a lot of success with it, and they're not all on this list. These are just some of the notable ones that have shaped the free-to-play market in the West as we know it now. And going free-to-play hasn't always set well with a lot of people, as they know that in the past it can make a game feel restricted and with limited content along with a bad community. That doesn't have to be the case always, and I feel that that might be the outcome of the free-to-play industry being new and still in the trial and error phase. I mean, you've got to admit, as a whole, we've seen improvement over time, and that's why more and more games are free-to-play right off the bat. It just takes time to develop, that's all. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. If you're looking for more info on the games in the list, check the links in the description below. Otherwise, head over to MMOHuts.com for more info on the latest free-to-play MMOs. And until next time guys, that's going to be it from me. I'm James Blonde. See you out there, gamers.